First off, I want to thank Vince and FEI for inviting us out here. I want to thank my colleagues, Mike, John, and Joe, for being here. Be nice to me, guys. I know you're grading my paper. As Mike indicated, I do a lot of the C-level CEO searches for the Overture group and president searches and GMs. And the first question every candidate asks us is about the CFO. Tell us about your CFO. What are their strengths? What are the weaknesses? Because I think, especially in the middle market companies, you're looking for more well-rounded financial generalists helping with M&A, helping with systems, helping with operations. Sometimes even some of these companies you're heading up administration and HR. So you're really looking for somebody that has that being the wingman, if you will, for the CEO, helping deliver the vision, but also being able to have those frank discussions if something is going off track. And also having somebody that you could trust doing a board presentation, whether it's to a private equity group or an advisory board or a board of directors. This is near and dear to me because I grew up in a house where my father wore both hats. He was president for Mallinckrodt in Europe for 8 years, loved the job, got to tell all the great news when everything was going well, really did a great job of turning it around. He was then brought back to the United States where he was made the CFO. And then all of a sudden, that was in 1990, 91 during that recession. My father had to close 3 business units and let go over 1,000 workers. And when you had the last name of Wright, right sizing was not a very good definition in our house. It was not acceptable term, and it was very tough to see. And I think that's some of the things you distinguish. A lot of times the CEO gets to be the deliverer of good news, but the CFO sometimes gets stuck with delivering the other side. So what I wanted to do today is obviously talk about, we have a quick slideshow to help maybe generate some questions and some thoughts from the audience. And then we obviously have a great panel in here that I think is going to provide some great insights for you. If we have time, we want to go over what we see the CFO top 10 skills and attributes. I might have John just jump up and do that for us. And we also have a take-home, or we can email to you, the 3-roll review questions CFO should ask of their CEO every couple of years. So what we want you to do is be able to walk away, say, do I have the right relationship with my CEO? And if not, maybe you come away with learning how to work better together after having a discussion and listening to these fine gentlemen up here. What I'd like to do before we start with the slideshow, I'd like for to introduce our panel, and after I introduce you, if you guys can give the 30-second to 1-minute elevator speech about your backgrounds. Elliot Resnick, we'll start with you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Elliot Resnick, and thank you for having me here. I'm a 35-year consumer product vet. The early part of my career was corporate at General Mills, but really for the last 25 years, I've been the CEO of companies usually in about the $20 to $200 million range, kind of focusing on scaling revenue, scaling structures. I've owned my own company. I have a lot of private equity experience. I've worked for other private companies. So I have lots of experiences with CFOs in all of those different types of structures. If there's one thing that I would absolutely agree with that Bill said, in the interview process, the first question I ask, even though it doesn't sound strategic, is how is the CFO? Because I think we all know that the company's futures are dependent upon it. And actually, I'm not a writer, but the only article I've ever written is the financial group is the most underinvested group in a company. And I come from a marketing background, so I believe that with all sincerity. But I'm happy to be here, and certainly outside of this meeting, if there's anything that I could ever do, just please reach out, and this is a lot of fun for me. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Mike Quig. I'm a 35-year veteran of industrial manufacturing and industrial services, so the Rust Belt is my backyard. I, like Elliot, started in a large corporate environment working for Alcoa and Paul O'Neill back in the late 80s, and then moved to Honeywell with Larry Bossidy, and then over to Eastman Chemical. Actually, Eastman bought a company of ours in Carpentersville called McWhorter Technologies, which was a specialty resins manufacturer for the paint and coatings industry. My career has been all in the commercial side, sales management, business development at the large corporate level, And after getting my MBA at Northwestern, I got an itch to leave and be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. So I jumped into being the president of a lower middle market manufacturing company, a plastic injection molding company here in Chicago. And it turned out that what was sold was very different than what I walked into. And so I started to hone my skills in turnaround expertise. Not workout turnaround, but truly underperforming manufacturing companies that needed to get some just fresh eyes, fresh ears, and some hard decisions made. So in the last 16 years, I've turned around 4 privately owned companies, all of them based out of Chicago. And the goal there is to professionalize the organization, to start growing the top line and differentiating the value proposition that we would go to the market with. I've had some of the best CFOs ever and some of the worst CFOs ever. And so happy to share some of those stories today.
Thank you, Mike. Torsten?
Yeah, good morning. My name is Torsten Reinhardt. I'm a experienced international finance executive. For the last 18 years, I have worked for several foreign private equity-owned companies here in the U.S. The last 12 years, I was the regional chief financial officer for DSI. It's a manufacturing company, part of a global group. The global group has about €1 billion in annual revenue, and the North American business has about between 150 and 200 million dollars in annual revenue. At DSI, I've done work with a typical CFO portfolio, all the financial operation, HR, IT, and a lot of legal work. And while I've held my position as a regional CFO there for 12 years, I have seen my fair selection of change over those years as the company went through numerous ownership changes. It was private equity owned the whole time, but by 3 different private equity companies and a group of banks. And I have reported to a regional chief executive here in the US that was responsible for North America, and then with a dotted line to the group CEO and CFO at the holding in Europe. And over the 12 years, I've worked for 5 group CEOs and 6 group CFOs. So fair amount of change there, and I am happy to share some of my anecdotes with you today. And if you want to connect afterwards, please, just seek me out and we exchange some business cards and maybe have a good chat. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you all today and speaking here. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. So before we get to the panel, we'll just do a quick slideshow. Want to spend no more than 1 minute on each slide, and then hopefully it'll generate some questions for you, and then we'll go to the Q&A with the panel. I'll probably start off with 1 or 2 questions, and then when you guys want to jump in anytime, that'd be great. So we're taking a look at this real quick. This is from a Russ Reynolds survey, and one of the things that's good, 82% of CFOs surveyed gave their CEO high marks for overall effectiveness. That's a really great number. One of the things you look at is less than half of the respondents gave CEOs a high score when it came to their ability to coach and develop the CFO. And only 49% of CFOs said they had a very strong relationship with their CEOs, the highest relationship ranking in the survey's 5-point scale. I mean, that's obviously some room for improvement there. Digging into this a little bit, you see that the CFOs hired by the CEO, 51% report having a very strong relationship with their CEOs. Of the CFOs who are inherited by their CEOs, 43% they too have very strong relationships with their chief. The good news is that CFOs who report themselves as having a very strong relationship with their CEOs are significantly more likely to act with confidence and transparency on several key dimensions. 70% of CFOs rating their CEO relationship as very strong say they provide their boards with exposure and access to their direct reports. This is in stark contrast to CFOs with weaker CEO relationships, with only 40% of whom say they do the same. 90% and 8% of CFOs with very strong CEO relationships say they are comfortable with bringing difficult issues to their chiefs. By comparison, only 29% of CFOs who reported weak relationships with their CEO said they're comfortable tackling tough topics with their bosses. Really showing that you really do have to develop a much stronger relationship and be able to have those tough conversations. 92% of the CFOs of the strongest CEO relationships said that they and their chiefs share mutual trust versus only 38% for CFOs with weaker relationships. Top executives across the country understand the importance of the CFO-CEO relationship and of having a CFO who can do more than just finance. Businesses of all sizes across all industries are looking for finance chiefs who can also be strategic partners and trusted advisors. And I think this is the important part down in here. The top 5 tips from leading board members, CEOs, and CFOs: complete transparency, no surprises and great communication, always maintain credibility, be open to constructive criticism and return the favor, and get to know the board. To me, these are pretty basic. As I said before, the slide just shows kind of what we just covered in here. You know, the percentage CFOs reporting very strong CEO relationship. 6 steps to a better CEO-CFO relationship. Remember why you hired a CFO. I think this is really important. I mean, most skilled leaders need to surround themselves with a diverse group of problem solvers. Remember that if you've chosen to hire CFO, it's because your company yearns for a new way of solving financial problems. So that means when you bring in somebody and let them do what you brought them in to do. Ensure you made the right hire. When hiring a CFO, you need to make sure you're hiring the right person. Choose a CFO whose culture does not conflict with that of the company. Define the CFO's role from the get-go. I know that's something that we at the Overture Group do in our onboarding plans. We want to make sure that you know and clarify exactly what you need from your CFO on day one. I mean, very clear definition of what the roles are and the expectations and deliverables. You can take baby steps that build that trust. You know, top-notch executives still need time to get to know each other. I mean, let's face it, it's the most important relationship in the company. It takes time to get to know each other, the nuances of how people do things. Clarify deliverables and benchmarks. I mean, that's one of the things that's just important. And I think when we hand out the document for we have for the three-row review questions the CFO should ask, this is something that you should always constantly be doing and having that constant communication. Champion communication above all else. We just started talking about that, but that's, you know, you got to keep the lines going, and sometimes you have to take the bad news with the good. Start building bridges with your CFO today. I mean, it's just, you know, remember why you hired them in the first place. Articulate what might be preventing you from relinquishing control to this person. Ensure the CFO's role is clearly defined. Start taking little strides toward building a bond with that person. To reduce confusion in today's hybrid workforce, clearly define deliverables and benchmarks. Most importantly, implement excellent communication. After all, CFO's there to take your company to the next level, and so are you. This is something we put together from all our interviews with CEO candidates and CFO candidates throughout the years. The top 10 skills and attributes that the CEO is asking us to look for in a CFO. Number 1, honest, trustworthy, and high in integrity. 2, strategic-minded with the ability to understand all aspects of the business. Being proactive, being analytical, being collaborative, and team-oriented. The ability to communicate with all levels of employees, orally and written. Example, would be the ability to communicate relevant and timely financial and management information effectively using analysis, KPIs, charts, and graphs. Keep in mind, not everybody knows how to read these things, so sometimes you have to adjust your communication skills to have people understand what you're doing. Effectively coach and mentor others. Strong decision-making ability. Obviously, the solid understanding of GAAP and corporate taxes, but not a technician. You're looking for that strategic partner, the person to roll up their shirt sleeves and get their hands dirty with you. The final one, strong financial generalist, having multiple disciplines. I mean, the ability to work with due diligence on mergers and acquisitions, understanding corporate finance, legal issues, employee benefits such as health insurance, 401k, life insurance, systems information technology, operations, risk management, and insurance. Those are just kind of give you an idea of some of the things that we've been seeing, and I agree with Russ Reynolds' report that these are the same things that we hear from our CEOs and candidates when they're looking for that CFO. What I'd like to do now is start with the panel. I might start with a couple of questions that each one of them could take a stab at, and then if you guys want to jump in at any time with follow-up or questions of your own, please feel free to do so. Gentlemen, as a CEO, what do you expect out of the CFOs of our customers as let me scratch this one. What skills do you believe are critical to being a successful CEO, CFO of a middle market company?
I'll go. I mean, most of those were really kind of summarized there. Those are most important. So without being completely redundant, maybe I'll just hit on a couple. I think credibility was listed up there, and that's more of a trait than a skill, but there's nothing more important than credibility. It's being accurate and not wrong, particularly in a private equity setting or when there are formal boards to report to. You know, within the team, you could be wrong, we're all wrong, and sometimes no harm, no foul, but just don't lose the credibility. And then I think the second thing would be to be proactive. You know, I think the CFO's looked at to protect the company's resources. A good CFO will see things first, whether it's inventory issues, or maybe there are issues with margins, or whatever's important to the company. Don't wait for it to show up on a document. Just bring it forward to the CEO as quick as possible. And I think the other thing is to be able to work with the team. I've had CFOs who have never liked the salesperson and don't understand the importance of some of the other groups, to ones where they absolutely get it. They know it's the team, and they're willing to be the face of the company when needed, to the board or to the private equity people, but also willing to support everybody else in the company. And yes, they are, you know, you're all jack of all trades. So that's critically important. But again, just credibility, be proactive, and just be a good, you know, have the CEO's back, and tell him when he's wrong, protect him from himself.
I'll add to that. I try and boil it down to very simple communication, honest, insightful, high integrity communication. And I'm always asking not for the what, not what is the gross margin this month or this quarter, but why. Really getting down into the why and but asking the CFO to have the insights and knowledge in all aspects of the business to be able to answer that question. I got the number too. Why is it 35% when it was 42% last month? What happened? And so some of the best CFO behavior I've ever seen is proactively meeting with department heads throughout the business on their own. And it just in a casual way, having lunch and just saying, how's everything going over in sales on the East Coast? How's everything going in our operations center down in Mobile? And having that kind of informal dialogue throughout the organization, it gives a much better answer than 35%. It's not the what, it's the why. Why are we at that number? Because at some point I have to sit there and go, we have to make some corrections. Where should we be making those corrections? And when you've got the why, it's a lot easier to make those decisions.
Yeah, I agree, and you know, I think really what's very important, and so far we've really only spoken about the CFO and what makes him successful. But you know, I think it's really important to keep in mind the company, you know, is ultimately run by, you know, the CEO is sort of the spearhead, but he has his management team, and in oftentimes, especially in smaller companies, it's sort of a leadership team of two. You have the CEO and you have the CFO sort of as the force behind the throne, right? And you know, I've seen great CEOs that have first and foremost great people skills. So they create and they set the tone and they create a culture within which they expect the employees to thrive and survive. So the CEOs need to be great motivators of the team. They need to be energetic leaders. They need to have a strategic vision, setting up the roadmap, you know, where the company is going to go in the long run. But oftentimes in smaller companies, they also need to be the top salesperson and the top negotiator with vendors, with customers, with employees, with all sorts of stakeholders, and of course with the board and with the shareholders as well. So, before we forget, I think it's absolutely critical to keep in mind the CEO need to be the top internal career scout, you know. to recruit the best talent from within, and when that doesn't exist, to recruit the best talent from outside the company. And once they found it, how do you develop it? That's really key among the CEO skill set as well, in my opinion. And sometimes the CEO, has the pleasure of playing the good cop. And that brings me to where I see the CFO. I already said, the CFO, in my experience, oftentimes is the power behind the throne. You always read, the CFO needs to be the trusted business partner to the CEO. And I think that's absolutely right. That's what makes the team successful. The CFO can assist the CEO on the strategic initiatives, while at the same time, he is also the gopher for all the tactical day-to-day stuff that the CEO should really not spend his time with, so that he can focus on the greater purpose of the corporation. The CFO can be the sounding board to root out some of the most craziest ideas, and the CFO needs to have a deep skill set of technical skills without losing himself in those details. So, not just counting the ants on the ground, but also see what's happening on the entire battlefield. And if things aren't going so right, it's oftentimes the CFO who has to be the bearer of bad news, both to the employees, but also to the board and to the shareholders. And when it comes to playing the cop game, the CFO gets to play the bad cop.
Thank you, gentlemen. Another question, being that you're all CEOs or CFOs, there are certain technical skills that what are the certain technical skills that you believe are critical to a CEO, CFO in a mid-market company, and how have these changed in the past 10 to 20 years?
I'll jump on that one first. From a CEO perspective, the change is constant, and whether it's tech or cannabis, there's so many constant agenda items that are hitting our inbox, and our inbox for that matter. So whether it's compliance or dealing with corporate finance and the banking, or if we've got to retool how we're going to do background checks and drug screens and all of the HR issues, or having a crypto virus come through our firewall and literally encrypt $4 million worth of our receivables. Those kinds of things are things that I'm hoping to have a knowledge of, but have an expertise at a CFO level, not down in the weeds like you were talking about in your presentation, but to be able to pull in the resources externally to make sure that our left flank and our right flank is covered.
Yeah, I listened to a great podcast yesterday about manager tools, I believe was the title. And one remark there really stuck with me. The presenter talked about, times have never been as fast as they are today, and change is our constant company, and the speed of change is increasing, accelerating all the time. And then he was saying, but if you go back 100 years, people felt exactly the same. And if you go back 2,000 years to the Romans, he was convinced, although he didn't have scientific proof, that they felt exactly the same thing. That the speed of change, has never been as fast as today. And that's probably, something that we'll face for the rest of our careers. The hamster wheel keeps turning faster and faster, and some of those things that Michael was talking about, viruses and Trojans and hacker attacks and all that was virtually unknown when many of us started our careers. I see some people in the room that started their careers before the invention of the computers. So and I'm not that much younger either. So.
And again, just maybe going back to a skill, and let's just talk about the fact that the demands are so high. It goes back to credibility. Everybody knows there's a lot to do, so it's always okay to say, I don't know, we'll figure it out. particularly to investors, private equity people, the board. They have a lot of information. There's no shortage of that. And every answer is not going to always be known. So, again, as a skill of being able to manage those relationships and just say, don't know, we'll get back to you. It is absolutely critical to maintain credibility, because everybody knows what the pace is, everybody knows what the issues are, and part of the goal of the CEO and the CFO is to manage the pace of how things happen. You might get pressures from private equity firms and others, and you have to be able to manage those expectations and say what you can do and what you can't do. Even on the critically important thing, when the board wants the board packet earlier, you'll never keep them happy. And earlier is never going to be early enough. And I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek, but that sometimes is, no, we can't do that. Sorry. So, and again, I think that's a light example of managing expectations and just having that skill in a very busy, fast-paced environment.
I think it's worth saying, though, that there are some places where you cannot go into a board meeting and say, I don't know. That's fraught with peril.
Sure.
And so I've worked in an organization where you went in with a 10-page deck, but you had 50 pages in your pocket ready to go when the top guy turned and said, what about this? And that wasn't something that we were covering, but I'm sure glad that you asked that. Let's go to page 47, and we have that. We were prepared to address that. And in the off chance that there was just one that was just coming way out of left field, then we obviously would have to go and say, we're not going to make this up. We just don't know how cryptocurrency is going to influence our operations in Slovakia. But we'll get you an answer by Friday.
Yeah, I think those are. I think Mike's right on the things paramount to running the business. But in kind of from the CFO standpoint and going through the financial statement, I just don't see anything wrong. You have 98% of the answers, and there's just one question there on the balance sheet or something. You've answered them all perfectly. That needs a little deeper digging. I think there to maintain credibility, don't know. We'll dig into it and get the answer. So I think you're right on strategic things. Ducks have to be in a row. But on certain detail things, better to just oops. Don't know, get back to you.
Yep.
Is oftentimes okay.
We'll get it to you by Friday.
Yeah.
And I think there's one that you guys are kind of digging on, are building this next question, being that you guys have had both all that experience in private equity firms and with private owners. What do private equity firms expect that might be different from individual owners from your experiences? And I know you kind of were touching on that just in the last 2 minutes.
I'll go. More analytical, more reporting, more metrics. The pace is quicker. The demand for accuracy is paramount. If you're wrong, you lose credibility so quickly. So don't say something unless you know it's correct. More formal and highly structured board meetings. And besides that, the ability to be available, 24/7, just to answer the questions directly from the private equity people. Believe me, a CEO does not want to get the calls from the private equity people about questions on the financials. And private equity people are usually very happy to go to the CFO and their group to ask those things, as long as they believe they're going to get the right answers, or I'll get back to you in those types of things. So I think that kind of summarizes the pace, the demand for information, and as Mike said earlier, the whys. We see this number. Why is it like that? And just know the whys, and have a great relationship with everybody and be able to work quickly.
I go with 5. Professionalism in private equity versus private ownership. Professionalism, a faster pace, deeper insight, the why, and a competitive drive. And that availability, the phone rings, I know it happened, the phone rang for me all the time at all the wrong times. I'm on vacation, I'm skiing in the back bowls at Vail. It just, the little birdie in my head said, this is an important call, and I, yep, it sure enough was the head of the firm going, so what's going on? It was like they had a spy in the office knowing.
You're not there.
51 weeks of the year, you call me right now. Yeah. Well, tell me what's going on here. What's going on in Slovakia? What's up with that cryptocurrency? Really? Yeah, so it was a much more rigorous protocol, and the CFO definitely brought more value to those interactions and being able to keep all that information flowing and answering all those questions from on high to enable me to go in, because a lot of the businesses I was really down in the shop, out with customers, doing executing the turnaround plans.
So you could ski.
So I could ski. Yeah. So and so we divided up the role. Okay, keep me in the loop, but keep the board and everybody else happy with information and give me the red flags when they're coming. In the meantime, I want to go with the vice president of sales or the head of engineering or R&D and get out and see Boeing and everybody else like that and talk about where we need to be 3 years from now.
Yeah, I think it's important, and many of you might know that the private equity companies, hardly ever are they in the business of creating a legacy, for the family or creating a legacy for the firm. They buy the company with a target to sell it again in 3, 5, or 7 years, hardly ever longer than maybe 10 years or so if it takes that long. But the mission is always buy something good and make it great, make it better. So that means there's going to be change. So the status quo, however good it is never going to be good enough. It's never going to be the target. So the private equity companies, they have a bias for action because they want to see change. And I think that's maybe one additional key here that I would like to add. And I think can be very different from a family, that has owned a company maybe for several generations, and for them the legacy and the standing in the community might be much more important than multiplying the value of the company at exit.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to turn over to the crowd. Does anybody out here have any questions of our panel? Yes, sir.
There was one stat that was kind of interesting. It said that 49% of the CFOs felt that their CEOs were not developing them, and in your pitch and your presentation. So I wanted to see what your guys' experience and reaction to that.
I'll go first. I could see why that would be the case, particularly in areas of communication, working with the team, how to communicate to a board or private equity people. The skills and the talent might be there, and there really aren't. Yeah, a CEO can't help anybody with the toolkit. But in terms of how it's communicated, the information to put forward, how to answer the questions, there could be a lot of help and a lot of training, because you want that person to be credible. You have to have each other's back. And a CEO may have more experience with that particular private equity firm or with the sales team. And instead of letting a problem continue, bad communications with other people in the company is to talk it through. Work with the salespeople as a peer. Here's how you could do it. In board meetings, don't tell stories. Be more concise. So I could see if a CEO doesn't do that, it could be very frustrating because they won't look good and they'll lose their credibility. And that's what it's all about, is the company and the CEO and the CFO together have credibility. So you got to help each other. And if you're not doing that, it blows up eventually.
So I inherited every CFO in all 4 different companies, and some were untouchable, and some were open to challenges and changes. but consistently what it was about open, candid communication. I wasn't going to your point, I wasn't going to be able to teach new tools in the toolbox. I don't know Sarbanes-Oxley and GAAP anywhere near as well as you folks in the room should and do know. But what I was trying to do was the softer side. How do you, as the CFO, engage with the Vice President of Sales and communicate and ask questions what they're doing and where we're going as that part of the business? And when was the last time you actually walked through the factory, shook hands with the guy on the CNC machine, and found out what the real issues are? You know, you're complaining about the workers' comp mod going up, but did you actually go out and see whether or not everybody has their safety glasses on? Those kinds of things, for me, were poignant just for a level of engagement and to get down to the why that I was talking about earlier. So I was always steering towards more of the softer skills and the operating business side of the skills. I really wasn't going to be able to help with the toolbox.
I got one more thing. It's making sure the CFO knows that they're the most important person in terms of how they can help other people in the company, that they're empowered to do it. Going to the head of sales. Gee, the CFO oftentimes is running IT because you're the dumping ground for everything. What can we do in our systems to help you? And form a bond with the salespeople to be doing those things. So a CEO could either know that they're empowered or encourage a CFO to make sure you're going out and providing, whether it's technical tools, pricing tools, or any kind of tool that's needed. And those types of deliverables, helping people solve problems, tend to form those really good relationships.
Yeah, in my experience, when you enter a new company in any finance, but particularly in the CFO role, hardly ever do you have the benefit or the pleasure to work for a CEO who used to be a CFO who has even deeper finance skills than you do. Most of the time, you do not. So you're the most senior finance person. So whatever technical skill you don't possess, you got to learn from somebody else. It won't be the CEO who's gonna teach it to you. So you have to be a self-motivated student constantly and find out new knowledge. Go to formal classes, go on the internet or wherever you might find that knowledge, that technical knowledge that you're lacking, because the CEO is not going to teach it to you, and nobody's going to take you under the wing. But I think where the CEO can take you under the wing, and I was lucky enough that was exactly the case in my career, is with the people skills. The CEO, a good CEO, has those people skills that I was talking about earlier. And when I became the CFO for the first time, I had probably good technical skills. It's still a lot to learn, but on the people skills and the presentation skills, I was awful. And, I wouldn't have been able to sit here, without sweating my shirt through in front of you all. And, only, after 12 years of working with an experienced CEO who had these people skills, who could take me under his wing in the board meetings and direct me a little bit and nudge me in the right direction from time to time, was I able to also develop some of these softer skills, these presentation skills, speaking in front of a group, presenting something other than just mere numbers and explaining where they're coming from. And I think that's the kind of training that you can expect from your CEO and that you should demand from your CEO if you don't get it voluntarily.
I caught a different statistic that Russell Reynolds presented there, and it was the 98%, 29%. If you feel like you have a really tight, working, good communication and relationship with the CEO, then you're able to have a more candid conversation, get to the why a lot faster, and be able to work collaboratively on fixing and growing the business. But if there's that lack of trust and that lack of communication, I think the statistic was 29%, where there just isn't that healthy bond, then there's a lot of struggling going on. And so ahead of training a CFO, I would put a higher priority on, we're going to lunch, we're going to dinner, we're going to get out of here. I want to know what you're all about, and I want you to know what I'm all about, and let's figure out how we can trust each other, communicate with each other, and be one consistent voice outside of our offices to the whole organization, and inspiring them and challenging them, and then you go right, I'll go left, and we'll I'll see you next Monday. Let's go.
Yes, sir.
As CEOs, what would be your opinion related to the value add of your CFO belonging to an outside professional organization like FEI, in terms of the value derived from that? As a CEO, how would you see that?
Oh, I think those things are critical. You know, in small companies, you can only hire so many resources internally. So any external resource you can use to help your business, whether it's a board member or a friend or an organization, are invaluable, whether they're credit associations or other things. You know, as much as a company knows, most creativity comes from the outside or other best practices. So I as a CEO, would always encourage, you know, have the lunches, go off for the training, you know, if it's out of town, if it makes sense, you know, use your judgment, you know, go do those things and bring those skills back to the company. So I think those are critically important. And if a CEO doesn't get it, you know, as the CFO, you know, you've got a guy who's kind of myopic, and you kind of have to push them and make them understand the value. But I would encourage those things always.
Yeah, I can remember when people would come in and say, you know, I want to go to a 2-day conference, and I'm like, the house is on fire. We got to stay focused on the business and fix this, that, or the other. And that was early on. And later, I changed that to, that's really important that you do go to the conference. You do get a continuous education, because otherwise you're stale and you're not learning and you're not keeping current with some of the dynamics that are in the marketplace today. And so I think it's very valuable to be a member of FEI, to go to some of the conferences that some of the big firms are hosting that are out there, just to be able to stay fresh, stay in touch. And when you see somebody across the room, you can engage in a conversation and go, well, what have you been doing for the last 30 days? And then you look in the mirror a little differently tomorrow. Am I doing those? Am I growing too? So I would make sure that you are challenging your CEO for that sponsorship and that challenge to keep going. John Lee, it comes in the back.
Yeah, there's one question that we interview many CFOs throughout the year. One question that I always ask is, what do you do to stay current, right, in the field? What are you doing outside of this organization to make sure you're understanding what best practices are and what's going out, you know, in the outside world? And you'll be amazed how many times I get the answer, I'm too busy to join an association, or I'm too busy to go to a conference, and to me that sends up a red flag that development and continuous learning is not a skill or a trait that you possess. And are you in an environment that doesn't want you to grow and progress? Then again, the red flag comes back to me. What type of CFO are you? Because there's different types of CFOs out there, right? You know, you have your lighter CFOs who really teeter on, controllers, right? And all the way up to your very strategic type CFOs who are out, they're understanding best practices. They're really growth, they're thinking about growth and profitability of the organization. So when you brought that up, I always ask that question because I want to get to know a candidate a lot better, and that's a great question to ask, or really to think about when you're presenting yourself even to an organization or potential employer. I stay current by doing X, Y, and Z, right? Also, ask the question of the CEO. What do you encourage? You know, was your past CFO or your past financial executive, did you encourage them to go out and get the education and training? Because, you know, how many CFOs are in the organization unless you work for a big publicly held company, right? Maybe the buck stops with you. So, just a thought. I mean, we interview tons of CFOs a year.
I mean, the constant learning and constant professional development is key. You know, what we knew yesterday and what we do today is not going to solve tomorrow's problems. So we need to constantly strive, you know, to acquire new knowledge and new ideas. And whether it's through conferences or whatever, you know, I think a good manager, a good CEO, a good president, a good board will always recognize that. Maybe if you're working for somebody who doesn't recognize it, you know, sometimes you might have to argue, you might have to fight for your own educational budget. I'm sure the CEO is going to go to the trade show and to conventions or whatever. So you have to really elbow your right, you know, that you should do that too. And if you can't get there, you know, then my advice that I always give to my people, if it was your own business, you know, would you spend your own money? And if the answer is yes, well, you know, have you thought about taking a personal day and paying out of pocket? You know, ultimately, you know, that's one thing that I would tell the CEO. If that was really critical, and I would tell him, you know what, I'm going to do that. And then I would not say, and while I'm there, I'm going to see whether there are any executive recruiters there to network.
Amen.
Because you don't have a great future.
You call the Overture group. That's exactly what you do.
Because you don't have a great future in such an organization.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm sorry.
I don't know. And Mike actually, I think, started talking about this a couple of questions ago, or was bringing it up, but trust was a big factor in all those statistics that Bill talked about initially. And I think it seems sort of like common sense that trust between a CFO and CEO would be important. What are the things that either happen that prevent trust, there being a good trusting relationship? And then to steal some of the stuff you guys are saying, not just what they are, but like why do they happen? Is helpful. So what and why is leading to a lack of trust, and then maybe how do you fix it if there isn't trust?
Yeah, one of them would be the protected CFO who'd been there before me. As I was asking hard questions, was covering up things without getting into details. And so, you know, as I'm peeling back the onion, it's getting more and more rancid, and that becomes a real problem. So clearly then I'm double checking everything that's coming from that direction, and I'm taking my eye off the ball of what I'm supposed to be doing. So that undermines trust immediately right there. Now, in a privately owned versus a private equity firm, I had to endure that and had to sit with the owner very privately and try and address that situation. And in that situation, the owner actually wanted to keep the CFO there. So I had to then go through a longer, slower process of trying to set goals to clean some of those things up and get more integrity in the communications and try and rebuild that trust. But when a leopard doesn't change its spots.
I would just add on to that, and if there was one thing I had to pick, would be inaccuracy of information. You could have a great relationship. I mean, you're connected at the hip. The CFO is the hardest working person in the company, but for whatever reason, maybe too busy or just the way they're built, information's inaccurate. Once it happens, twice, but when there's the constant inaccuracy of information, it breaks down the trust and credibility. And then also lack of being proactive. Why didn't you tell me? I think those would be the two things that break down trust.
But boy, when you have it, it's great. It's fun to go to work on Monday, and you want to stick around Friday afternoon and go for beers. Some of the best times, we had a no smoking on property policy. Oh, the cameras are rolling, never mind. We had a great win thanks to Blackman Callick and then Plant Moran. We had a great win, great win. And so everybody went home, and we're at the headquarters, and the owner comes rolling in, and he's super happy because we just increased EBITDA a lot. And the CFO is there, and I'm there, and everybody was I had just professionalized the whole HR department. And so there were rules and regulations, and there's the little sticker at the front, don't bring a gun in and don't smoke on property, 10 feet from the front door and all that stuff. And I'm like, I got a box of Cubans here in my office. And the CFO goes, I got some Maker's Mark down the hall. And we got our feet up and we're smoking Cubans, drinking Maker's Mark. And then the owner walks in and goes, hey guys, what are you doing? And we had the best Friday night probably of my career, celebrating a huge win where not only were we doing great things for our bank to get back into, a better place there, but our employees, our owners, it was a win for all of the various stakeholders in the business. And so we were coming in next Monday really excited about it. And so that trust of being able to work with somebody and closing and locking the doors after hours to have our little party was fun.
Yeah, there must be a lot of CEOs out there that had one or the other disappointing experience with a CFO, either that they hired or that they inherited. Because whenever you open up the Wall Street Journal and you read, about blue chip companies, especially those that are a little bit in trouble, like GE or, of that nature, they have a new CEO and then you can almost set your clock, let's see how many months it's going to be till they hire a new CFO, right? Even if he doesn't hide stuff under the rug, sometimes just a general house cleaning is, number one on the priority list, right? That's that's one way of making sure you have a trusting relationship with your CFO is hiring him, right? Because he won't have a network inside the organization yet, and he doesn't owe any debt to anybody before you.
Mike brought up an interesting point of how good a culture can be. And a CFO is oftentimes playing the role of HR and hears things and knows things, and a great skill in a way to really build the trust, going back to the original question, is knowing when to bring things to the CEO's attention. There's confusion about goals. There's a personality problem here. And I think that's one way, it's a huge trust builder, is having that skill, the courage to point out when things are wrong without overburdening herself, the CFO, or the CEO with minutia. So I think it's a wonderful trust builder on having the courage to tell the CEO, you know what, you're the leader, you're responsible for the culture, and maybe these issues are all inherited, so they're easy problems to bring up, but maybe, you're just not communicating really well. People don't know what's going on. To be able to do those things really helps form the trust. And most CEOs will appreciate it. The first reaction might not be great, but they really will appreciate it. It's a huge trust builder.
I think they got my question, which was, what are the traits you found lacking when you've not been happy with the CFO role?
Excellent. And then, sir, you had a question?
Yeah, so talking about hiring, there's obviously from a middle market company perspective, you can look at those candidates that have been part of the middle market organization in the past and have been deeply involved in all the components, so IT, treasury, in addition to the more commercial aspects. Or there's those candidates that have been part of larger organizations that have probably touched a number of those and have great commercial acumen, which may be better than some of the folks that have been middle market organizations, but haven't been owned treasury specifically before. How do you think about that? It's obviously situational, but what's the most important in what's your view on somebody who's been deeply involved in minutia, maybe doesn't have the commercial experience, which is somebody who's kind of the opposite of that?
You've inherited. I've hired a number, and it's really situational. In a lower middle market company where there isn't a strong controller there, the operational skills and the interest in being an operator might be really important. Get your hands dirty. Maybe you are a large corporate guy. If you've never been in a what we'll call a middle market company before, is that really going to be a fit? So I think it's just really situational. I think there was a slide of making sure there's great understanding about what the biggest needs in the company are for. If the biggest needs are for someone to build a financial system because there's chaos in the financial group, you may want to have someone who has had those experiences at a higher level. So I think it's very situational, and as the CEO, you really have to know what the biggest needs are in the financial group. So whether you're working with executive search, which in a CFO search always would do it because I have no way of gauging the technical skills. But those soft skills are critically important, and it's just situational. CEO better know what he needs, or you could find a skill and a cultural mismatch.
I bet this is what drives John and Mike and Bill crazy 3 times a day is, well, what do you really want? Do you want the corporate person coming in, or do you want the utility player? I can tell you from where I am now, having done 15, 16 years on both the big corporate and in the small business, I'd want the utility player. Because I'm running lower middle market and middle market companies, I need somebody who can play all positions on the field. And then it's the needle in the haystack piece. But I need them to be deep, and then John goes crazy. He's like, oh, but I also need them to be really good in, all aspects of that. So, it's the needle in the haystack question. Now, ironically, I am not that person. Earlier in my career, I came out of corporate America, like I talked about earlier, Alcoa and Honeywell, and jumped into private, a lower middle market, $20 million plastic injection molding company that was underperforming. And true story, I got there on Monday, and the office manager walks over and says, for all intents and purposes, hey, new guy. I'm the president of the company. Hey, new guy, we don't have enough money to make payroll on Thursday. I just came out of Alcoa, Eastman Chemical, and I turned and I said, well, call HR, call finance, call accounting. And she said, you are HR, finance, and accounting. That was day one of my second MBA. I already had one on the wall, but that was a real one. And I mean, that when you have to go through those kinds of fire drills, or the real fires, I like to find someone who's been through that same kind of roller coaster and survived, or better yet, failed and learned their lessons from it.
Yeah, in the smaller middle market companies, typically, you don't have that much of a bench strength, whether it's in the technical or in the finance arena. It's the same everywhere, right? Every employee wears a lot of hats. You're not going to have a lot of specialists, that only do tax, only do treasury, only do sales taxes or what. It's typically the controller who does a lot of all that. And, and if he isn't all that strong, then you probably need a CFO that, has done a lot of that. Because if not the CFO, who else is going to find that the controller doesn't know how to do the new lease accounting, for example? The CEO is not going to do it, and you don't want to wait till the auditors tell you it's all goofed up.
Okay. Well, being cognizant of time, I don't know if there's any other questions or anything else. I want to, so what we probably want to do is wrap up real quick. I know we're going to have John talk about the 3 role review questions for CEOs should ask. So if you guys want to pick that up, we have the packet up here.
That's, Bill, if I could say something,
Yeah.
Pick that up because look at the 3 very simple questions you can ask, especially if you're in transition, if you're interviewing for a role. This will help define and set expectations up front so there's a higher percentage of success when you take the role, okay? Also, this will help you, once you're in the role, and Vince, I think you may have gone through some of this when we did a follow-up, because we placed Vince at his current employer years ago. We've been using this for years. But it's good to evaluate the CFO role once you are in the chair, and it'll help you understand what expectations you are achieving. The expectations that were set, are you achieving them or are you not? And if you're not, you could use that as developmental tools to make sure you put the train back on the tracks. But, so take that tool, Kathy, you can't take it, it's very proprietary.
Can you email it to me too? And I'll
Yeah,
send it
that'll
with-
come with the
With
presentation.
the
but
presentation, because I
a
don't think
couple
that was
common
one of
sense
the.
questions that'll help you.
Okay.
Great.
Well,
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Kyle.
thank you, panel.